Today we're looking at the work of Emile Claus. He was a Belgian artist born in 1849 and passed away in 1924. And he drew a lot as a child. He even went to an art school nearby that his father paid for to learn to draw, and he won all kinds of awards, but his dad would not let him go to art school. You can see a picture of him here in his studio later in his career, but his father sent him to France to learn to be a baker. And while in France, he learned to speak French, but had no interest in baking. So eventually he got a family friend to convince his father to let him go to art school. Had to pay for it himself, but he got their permission. We're looking at his work in terms of his backlit subjects. Painted a lot of backlit paintings, with the exception of his self-portrait here. It's not backlit. But backlighting is when the subject you're painting, the sunlight is in front of the viewer. So you're looking into the sun to some degree. It can be on either side, but it still is in front of the viewer. And backlighting gives you dark vertical planes. In other words, everything that is upright, trees, figures, they're going to be darker because the sun is in front, and the upright planes, figures in the trees, are blocking the sunlight, and they're dark. And then your flat area is generally lighter, and of course your sky is the lightest, and your slanted is also dark, but not as dark as these verticals. And again, by vertical shape, I mean anything that's upright. A fence post is upright. Trees, tree trunks, figures. But generally, you're speaking in terms of large shapes, not small detail. Also, when you have backlit subjects, the values are a higher key, which means the values are all lighter, that they're keyed lighter. So you still have the same value relationships between them. They're just all lighter. So your darks are going to be lighter on a backlit subject. Your lights will be lighter. And the reason the darks are lighter is because, again, the sun, which is, I don't know, somewhere right in here, just out of the picture, just out of view, everything is filtered through sunlight that's coming in front. Because, again, the sunlight is in front of you, so it kind of makes a sunlit mist, if you will, that kind of lightens the values of those upright darks. And as we move along, all these are upright, pretty sure. You can see here the sun is you're looking right into the sunlight. Maybe it's a bit up here, just out of the picture plane. You never want to put the sun right in the picture unless it's kind of filtered with clouds or fog or something, because the sun is just too intense. There's no way to represent the sun looking directly at it. You would have to make everything else very dark and gray to make the sun as bright as it really is. So it's always out of the picture plane, but you can see how light these shadows are on the trees. They aren't real dark, as they would be as if the sun was behind the viewer or to the side a little bit. But here the sun is in front of everything, and it makes everything vertical darker. And again, the higher key, the lights are lighter, the sky's the lightest, but everything is very light that's being hit by the sunlight. And shadows are also light. There's still good contrast between dark and light, but everything's a bit higher keyed. You can do the same thing. You can have a lower keyed painting. In other words, all your values are keyed darker. Same relationship between them, just everything's darker. So you don't want to take just one value and make it darker. You have to take all the values and make them either darker or lighter, depending on which way you want to go. But they all have that suggestion of strong sunlight. With the backlighting, you're going to have a warmer sky. Even on a very clear day, or if you're in the southwest where there's no moisture in the air to speak of, so the sky always looks really blue. But if you look, if your subject is backlit, it's not going to be as blue. It's going to be too light and too warm to be blue. Now, if the sun is behind you and it's a front-lit subject, not a backlit subject, then your sky is going to be darker. But when you look into the sun, the sky is going to be lighter. And a lot of his are very, very light. Now, they can still be cloudy somewhat and still be a bright, sunny day. But you can see darks are generally the shadows, the dark areas, not as much detail. The detail is going to be in the lights. The previous painting, here there is detail on these figures, but it's very muted, very soft-edged. All the edges within the shadow are going to be soft-edged, and harder edges between the dark and light. A nice color variation. He does use small, choppy brush strokes, which has kind of a sense of picky detail, but it's really not picky detail. You still have the big masses holding together, the big shapes of the trees in the background. Even though there's a lot of little brush strokes, it's all somewhat the same value with some subtle color change. Same thing with the haystacks, the figures. There's really no detail in there to speak of. All the big shapes that make up the painting, the 5 or 6 big shapes, are all big and simple. It's just that they're applied with a smaller, kind of choppier brush stroke. So another one here, some detail here in the foreground with all the flowers. But again, figures, sunlight on the top of the head, top of the shoulders and arms, but the rest of it's dark. Again, because of the backlighting. Gives you a lot of contrast, but the darks aren't as dark as they would be in a subject that's not quite so backlit. Again, shadows in the background here, even the foreground, they're not real dark. They're definitely dark, and there's a lot of contrast between the light and the dark, but the shadows are lighter, and the light areas are real light. The light areas, there's not much color difference between the light on the hair, the light on the shirt, the light on the skin. Not much value difference either, because again, you're looking into the light, and the light on the figure just becomes a glare. Same thing on the grass. There's no color to it because the light is so strong. It just becomes a kind of a white, warm glare. Almost cool, but again, like the shadows in the shirt is so cool that the light on the shirt doesn't look quite as cool. But the lighter the light, the cooler it gets because you have to add so much white to it, and that's going to cool it down. This, the sunlight on the grass is still somewhat warm because there's some yellow in it, and the darker shadows in the grass are more on the blue side, so that gives you your temperature contrast. But the sunlit green is not very warm. Again, because of the glare of that sun being just right there in your eyes. But nice simplicity in the shapes. Even though it's using a smaller brush stroke, all those big shapes hold together so it works well. You can see that in the tree trunk here too. A lot of little brush strokes, and there's a lot of detail in the tree trunk because there's a lot of value change. Little tiny value change, which is detail. But the tree trunk still holds together as a large dark mass. Again, everything vertical is dark. Haystacks, trees, cow, fence posts. Those vertical shapes are dark. The slanted, which is the hills back in here, they're dark also, but not as dark. Mainly because they're so far away, but slanted planes are usually a little lighter than the vertical. You usually want to separate those two so your subject doesn't flatten out. So another one here, a little darker, a little bit lower key. You can see more color in the lights, darker darks in here. So it's not as high a key painting as the others, especially for backlit. But again, that short, choppy little stroke gives it a sense of detail in the grass. But the grass is essentially 2 values, shadow value, light value. He's just using subtle little changes to kind of break it up. The problem with too many details, if you're breaking up your painting into too many small little details, is that you lose those big masses, those big shapes that make the design, that create the composition in the painting. But he doesn't lose that. even though his darks have a bunch of tiny little brush strokes and detail in it, they still read as one big dark broken up by smaller lights, but not a bunch of different values. The shapes still hold together pretty well. Now this is a watercolor sketch. Same thing here, still using that small, short, choppy brush stroke, but his big masses hold together. Even though there's a lot of stuff going on in the trees back behind there, they still read as one big dark mass. Same thing with the figures, different colors, but they still work as a dark vertical shape. You can see the light kind of gives it a bit more form and dimension in there. Not real picky, but a real nice feel to it. Looks like a painting, doesn't look like a copy of a photograph. Another one here, again, everything vertical. Light posts, carriages, horses, figures, trees, boats, the sails, they're all dark against a lighter background of a yellow-orange sky and kind of a warm bluish-green water with some orange in it. So a simple dark light, warm cool, but very high key. Darks are lighter and lights are really light. Another backlit. Color is a little bit stronger in the shadow here. Lights aren't quite as light. They don't have that glare to them, but it's still very light. Plus you're dealing also with photographs of a painting that not sure how accurate it is, but I'd still consider this somewhat high key, even though the shadows are a bit darker. And the foliage here still holds together as a dark, even though he's broken it up now with the light filtering through the leaves. Sun is right in here somewhere, so it's filtering through the leaves, and there's a lot of orange, red orange, light yellow orange, a lot of variation of value and color in there. So it doesn't hold together there, but he doesn't want it to. He wants to show that light filtering through. But the dark trees in the background, the trunks, the shadows in the foreground, they all hold together as big, simple, dark and light shapes, even though there's a lot of color variation. You can have something the same value, but have a lot of different colors in it, and that still will hold together. It's when you have something that has too many value changes in it that breaks it up. Now this is not a backlit scene. The sun looks like it might have gone down, and just a little bit of light left over from the day that's kind of giving it some light from the sky. I just like this painting. I like his treatment of the trees, the shapes, the masses in the trees. Very, very nice. He had some paintings that were larger and a bit tighter, maybe a bit stiffer. This is the self-portrait. Again, somewhat high-key, lighter values. You can see here in his studio the size of his paintings. He worked large, so didn't mess around. Big paintings. He was very successful as a painter. Moved to Antwerp. I think he's spent his life there in Antwerp.